The ACE's Optimus Show with your host, Dr. Craig Morris.
Everybody, Dr. Craig Morris here. Welcome to ACE's Optimist, dedicated to optimizing human potential in the clinic of life. Or we could also say we're interested in making sure that each of us is our very best. This is around our 10th podcast now, and I'm really enjoying my guests each time. And we're in the process of setting a foundation of what I hope will be a roadway for people to look for more excellence in their own lives, in their personal lives, how to improve. Could say, a good way of thinking about it is good enough is never good enough. We've had a number of guests on that have shown different levels and different types of leadership along the way. For example, we've had past leaders such as Mr. David Chapman Smith, the original Secretary General of our World Federation of Chiropractic, our world political body, who helped to organize it, establish our relationship with the World Federation with the World Health Organization. We have current leaders such as Dr. Sierra Borges, who is the director of the Federation of Latin American Chiropractic Associations. We have coming up our current president of the World Federation of Chiropractic, Dr. Kendra Da Silva. And we have other leaders that we've interviewed, such as in the world of chiropractic rehabilitation, and a wonderful friend and protege of mine, Dr. Brett Winchester. We've had leaders in the world of sports journalism, such as Mr. Kevin Weeks. So I was thinking as I was inviting guests in, we've had those past leaders, we've had these present leaders, but what about future leaders? What are the foundational aspects that lead to excellence and where people tend to look towards others as being leaders? And I was inspired by a student of mine over the past 2 years, a DNS student of mine, who I see shows all of the traits that I would look for in a leader, in a future leader. And with that, I would like to welcome today's guest, Mr. Neil Kozikowski. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morris. I really do appreciate you having me here.
We have, welcome, Neil, and you have a fascinating history, a past history, and I think a current history, and what I think is also a fantastic foundation for a great future. Let's talk just a little bit about that. Because you're currently a chiropractic student at Parker University in Dallas. What term are you?
Going into Tri-8.
Tri-8. So you're starting your final year. But you didn't start. A lot of times now, students, they think and they choose chiropractic as a profession when they're maybe in high school or in college. For me, I started right as I was starting my college years. Although back in the later 1970s, the majority of chiropractic students were older, and very often they got into the profession not because of financial incentives or anything. They generally had miracles occur in their life, and that inspired them to go into chiropractic. So when I started in school, I was the youngest in my class when I was at Cleveland Chiropractic College, Los Angeles. And I had two classmates that were 48 years of age. One was a PhD professor, actually, who had a miracle in his life. And so we see that it's gradually transitioning. So I'd like to understand a little about your history, because I know it didn't start in chiropractic.
So I started off playing professional baseball. That was kind of my big crack into professional life, and kind of growing up playing with my dad and pretty much everywhere all across the United States. And I was very blessed to be given the opportunity with the Pirates to come in and try and make it to the big leagues. Unfortunately, my career was cut short. I did have an injury, and after the injury was kind of when I was thrown a little bit into turmoil. my identity was in baseball, and I didn't really know what life was like without it. So I didn't give it up. So when they told me they released me, I was driving home, very unmasculine, but I was, crying and I basically had come to the conclusion that like everything was over. And a couple of weeks later, my dad basically kicked me in the butt and said, come on, you can figure this out. So I was looking all around for practitioners and people that had shockwave, because that's what I thought I needed.
And you were a pitcher, right?
I was a pitcher. Yes, I was. I did pretty much everything when I was playing with the Pirates. Started relief as well as middle relief, which was really great. And so I found Dr. Lev Kalika in New York, and that kind of began my journey into more of the chiropractic side of things, where he had PT, he had chiropractors and a biomechanist on staff, and I basically just started picking their brain. And they were amazing to help me with, navigating certain things, how I should rethink certain things. And believe it or not, within, about 6 to 8 months, I was finally back up to 95 miles an hour. So they had given me a new hope for, trying to come back and play baseball. And unfortunately, then I sustained my second injury, which was basically my career ender. And then I basically, didn't know what to do. So I went back to school. I studied, I was supposed to go pre-med, and then near the end of my third year, we had a New England ACSM conference where I ran into a professor that was at Parker. And he basically called me from across the room when I was getting ready to run into one of the seminars. And he basically beckoned me over and explained to me what chiropractic was. And it reminded me of Kalika and some of the other practitioners that he had under his staff. And I definitely was super interested. And it ended up being very funny because I went back basically the next day and I had an interview for the PT for UConn. And they basically canceled on me 3 times. And I basically said, 3 strikes, you're out, So it ended up being very funny. I came down and, I've been with Parker ever since, and I love it.
I know. Fantastic history, and that's what led you to chiropractic. And you were one of these fireballing pitchers, well into the 90s. Mm-hmm. And then you went to see Dr. Kalika, who's an old friend, colleague of mine from New York City. We studied together under Professor Kolaj in DNS at the Prague School of Rehabilitation. So did he introduce you to DNS? Was that where you first heard about it?
He did. He introduced me to a couple of really key concepts that I think I've basically borrowed or stolen from him, which was prepping the base, which was trunk control, and kind of starting off and analyzing these different slings and different parts of the anatomy, and just like a different way than I've seen when I was working with the PTs at the Pirates, where it was basically like you had an elbow injury, we're going to do, internal external rotation, or you have you have lateral epicondylitis, so we're just going to do, picking up the dumbbell, putting it down, and stuff like that, where, he was like, no, it's all a chain. And he leveraged a couple of great modalities. He had dry needling, he had shockwave, and I think those were the seeds for when I really was super interested in this thing that was, bringing me back to 95, because shockwave was great. It was really loud and it made me yell at his clinic. If he ever watches this, I bet you he can attest to the screams that were coming out of his little office, where they were putting these dry needles in me for, 30 minutes and just leaving me there. But so it was really fascinating to kind of see that lens. And I really haven't found anything quite like it since.
Interesting. So we met about 2 years ago when you were in my DNS A course, mm-hmm. I believe, and you've been in a few more of my courses, our DNS courses, including one of them, our pediatrics course, where I assisted lead instructor Yuri, also known as George Halamka, who flew in from Prague, a wonderful PT for Prague and the Prague School. And every time you've come, you've shown this wonderful curiosity, this wonderful enthusiasm, this hunger for not just understanding the basics of the material, but trying to glean every little bit of it. There's an old Slovak saying that says, if you're going to take the fruit, you should squeeze every drop.
Mm.
And I think that's a good life lesson. And when I see what allowed us, I think, to become closer, because now we speak fairly regularly, is that I see you're one of those who lives that life model that if you're going to take the fruit, squeeze every drop from it. If you're going to take the class, learn every little thing about it and learn everything associated with it, and start to keychain different approaches together and add concepts. And I think, so I really appreciate your enthusiasm.
Oh, thank you, Doc. I've been very blessed with, my first career of mastery of something. And I think it allowed me to see other masters and realize a really key factor, which is I can't do it all by myself. I don't know everything. And I remember that class very vividly because I remember like, oh man, I got to go talk to that guy. He's got all this knowledge. And it was really fascinating to be able to, have such a great surprise, because unfortunately I hadn't heard of you before that class. And I'm glad that I, was in that, heading over to you and kind of in that moment at the right time to be able to meet you, read your book and, start on this path of, kind of where we're at now.
Well, it's been my pleasure. And as you've continued to grow, I know you read, I think you read all of my book. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember Brett Winchester had said the same story when he was going through school at Logan, that he read my book all the way through it. And so this is not something that somebody has to do, but instead that they choose to do. And it's not only my book, but you've read a number of books on your own going through school.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. My favorite thing is leaders or readers. I loved baseball so much, and I still do. Still an obsession. And I think that's one thing that I have borrowed from my previous career, is that you got there's a little something loose when, you do something to, so often, so much that like once you've left that thing and you're trying to go do something else, it almost it comes with you, and I started seeing a bunch of really smart, intelligent people in their career. And I asked them like, what was the way they got there? And it was reading. And so, as like ever since like I basically got fired, I just plunged deep into it. And, I found that the more I read, the better I am, the smarter I am, the better I am at talking with people like yourself, like with Brett and, Dr. King and, the rest of the staff at Parker, and trying to, build the machine basically that's going to go out there and go treat patients and help people.
So what other books have you read that you felt inspired you?
I would say Rehab of the Spine. That's a great one. I really love that one. I think they're a great kind of, 1-2 punch, where I really like the low back syndromes because it really starts to open up the idea of looking at, something that I think we do take for granted, which is that like a lot of people consider us low back docs and say like, all right, so what do we have? What do we know? How can I start looking at this problem from a multidisciplinary approach? And then the Rehab of the Spine, I really do love from the fact that it basically starts laying out all of the different algorithms that people, have that, we're associated with. So like neurodynamics, a lot of the 3-letter acronyms is, in there. And he starts to kind of drill this approach a little bit further, which is something that your book touched on, which is that biopsychosocial model and how important that is in, trying to stay away from nocebo effects and try and drive, more, self-mediated help, and instead of practitioner based, it's more patient-centered care.
Yes. And for those that may not be familiar with that term, so everybody I think is familiar with the term placebo, where you feel as though a person's improvement, whether it's functional or whether it's self-perceived, but it's motivated because they hope that it'll improve them and they're positive about it. So nocebo is just the opposite, where a person feels as though something won't help them, and because of that, they'll have a negative opinion of what they're heading into, and they won't benefit from it because, in so to speak, they may not be giving it a chance. And so these are very critical concepts that we address, certainly. And I think it's interesting also to note, since my book was published in 2006, that you enjoyed it and you found it to be still quite timely and relevant. And that's true. What I found, I think I mentioned it in an earlier podcast, but when I was organizing my textbook, I was even looking at books from the 1920s and 30s, and found that there was an awful lot of overlap in truths that were back then. And this is before we had a lot of research, but what we had was clinical experience and wise clinicians who then took the time to write and go the extra mile. And this is what I see in your case as a student, looking for excellence and looking with curiosity, but also with unbelievable levels of enthusiasm. And I see now, as you're talking, if I get it right, it's a good chance that competitive nature in the world of sports, that you knew you had to do everything you could to be able to compete and to be your best in order to be able to proceed in a very, very competitive athletic world.
That is a fact. I couldn't agree more. A lot of people know me as very, very lovable and fluffy, like a giant like marshmallow now. But I have always been, I've always had a little bit of madness in me. Where you get on the mound, man, it's a different animal. It's how do I win at all costs? And I think that was kind of one of the weirdest things that I found outside of baseball and out of pro sports was when I came to school, back to school, it was like when a professor would recommend a textbook by, let's say, Exercise Science by Dr. Scott Powers, and I would read the book. People would be like, you read the book? I was like, yeah, of course I read the book. Like, how else am I going to learn the materials? Like, well, you could just read the slides. I was like, you could read the slides, but you're going to miss these little nuanced things that the teacher is kind of saying that's not really, really important. I just want to give you the 80% that you're really going to need to pass the test. And so, I think what's really funny is I've definitely taken that and run with it where, there's been some books, like there's one, it's called The Neurobiologic Mechanisms of Manual Therapy. It's back in 1978. Yanda and Levitt are both in it, and a bunch of other practitioners as well that are kind of debating these questions of what's going on when we touch a person or when we adjust a person, when we stretch a person. And I still, to this day, everybody's like, wow, you're crazy, man. Huh?
Is that Core's book?
Yeah.
Erwin Core was brilliant osteopath. And yes, Professors Levitt and Yanda both contributed in his book. So then now you're in the 8th term at Parker. And what I've seen, we've talked a little bit about this, in the past several years, I feel as though there's been maybe a little bit of a change in the focus or the temperament of today's students. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned earlier, when I was in school, I was the youngest, but I had a bunch of classmates who were between 5 and 10 years older than me. And we just all, I didn't feel much, and it was impressive that I didn't feel an age gap because I was at Pepperdine before that, and everybody was my age when I was attending Pepperdine University. So, but now I think that the age differences, even smaller age differences, are more dramatic than in the past because now almost all of the students are going into chiropractic as a primary vocation, as their first attempt. And many of them have never even had a job. They just were full-time university students, and then now they're full-time chiropractic students without almost any employment history. So all of a sudden now you're a little older. So how old are you now?
I'm 30.
So you're about 5-6 years older than your other classmates. Mm-hmm. And you find that maybe that you've noticed the difference.
Definitely. It's been great though too. Like I think one thing that I really do appreciate of the younger cohort is I feel like they keep me on my toes. Where as like more people my age, we actually argue more about like similar things, like, oh, these kids don't know, and what real life is, and all this debt, and how are we going to pay it back, and everybody else below us is basically like, dude, I just got to pass the next exam, like and but like I think one thing I really do like is that they ask a lot of questions that we don't ask. And I think it's really great that we have to learn how to navigate things and simplify things and expand on things where, like, I feel like when I was younger, because there wasn't so much information, that like it was pretty easy to say, it's just one simple question, nobody's going to question it. And so I really like the diversity that we have in age groups, especially because like we have a couple of great students at Parker, like Rashawn, Levi, some of these people that are different vocations before they came in here, where one is an OT, one's a PT, and one's an AT. And what I love is how would they treat patients? What's the lens they look through, and now how are they looking through things as potential DCs or future DCs, and how do they navigate the younger generation? So it's definitely different. I think COVID really changed how people pay attention to things, which I think is the biggest thing I find. But I will say, even though there's maybe not the best changes, I think it's a good stratification of unique minds all in one area.
So that leads me to the next topic, because now we're moving into this dramatic change of artificial intelligence, AI.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a professor at Cleveland, Los Angeles, we saw that, in fact, there was a book that came out called The Dumbest Generation, which was not very complimentary. It was a professor at Emory University who was talking about concerns about college students who were not putting things into their memory, but instead were just looking to get information that was from the digital age and online, and not retaining information that he was concerned was critical. But now we can move past that, because people don't really think about that so much anymore. In the end, you have to be able to retain enough to be able to apply it. But now all of a sudden, now we have the next generation, now that we're moving into AI. And I was wondering how you see the students, the chiropractic students, which of course, I think if we see them, then we'd say the same with ATC students, PT students, OT students, MD students, and just probably all other students. How are they applying it, and how do you not over rely on them, and as a result, fail to learn critical skills and critical knowledge?
Oh, that is a great question. Because it's funny, because I lived with a couple of computer science majors when I was in college in undergrad. And, ChatGPT was just coming on the scene, and they had all known about it before pretty much the mainstream people did. And I remember sitting with them, and they were having all papers written from ChatGPT and sending it in, because there was no way to check whether you wrote it or not. And that's carried into, unfortunately, to grad school as well. But I think, one thing that's really fascinating is they've taught me so many different ways to leverage AI. I think it's just taken a little bit of my experience to say, like, we're tipping too far into the reliance on it, to where it's no longer a tool and it's the thing that's driving the bus, so to speak. And so for me, how I make sure that like I'm staying on point with what I'm trying to do, instead of letting AI run rampant, basically, is by asking it to generate questions. There was a couple of really good books that I loved reading about how to leverage AI, and one of the key factors was in like thought generation or idea generation. Getting the ball rolling was a great way to leverage AI, because we're really good at taking over and kind of finishing the sentence, or remodeling, or branching off of it. And so I think for me personally, that's how I try to leverage it. How can I memorize things quicker? What's the new research out? That's who do I really need to focus on? I leveraged it a lot for DNS, and what were the main contributors, and where can I find the information that I need. That really saved me a lot of time, that I feel like a lot of practitioners that I met over the years try to synthesize all the stuff that they're dealing with. They spend a lot of time searching, and I'm very, very lucky for the younger generation, because I think they've done a great service to at least me in basically saying, like, you don't have to go to the library and read all of these books. You don't have to go all this place. You can ask ChatGPT to start pulling up some of the research on both sides of the argument, and which one's stronger, which one's not, how to analyze that research. So those are a couple of really key things I think that have been very powerful. Unfortunately, I say that as being like the very small percentage of people that really try to, like, learn the material. So I would say most of, the people that I do know, they use it for everything. It's their paper writing. It's their, plans and all that stuff, like their active treatment plans and stuff like that. So I think the tough part is it's a very fine line, and you just have to continue to make sure that you're not falling on the other side of the line where it's driving the bus.
That reminds me of a favorite old Russian saying that the sailors used to say, and it was associated with if they were on a sinking ship. And what they say is, pray to God and then swim to the shore.
Oh.
So it's one thing. It's good to have faith. It's good to be able to rely on something other than your own resources, or something greater than you, or bigger than you, or very powerful to assist you. Mm-hmm. But then once you have that, you still have to get to work. It's not, you can't just rely on it, because in the end, you have to work to save yourself. You have to work to grow yourself.
I agree. Also, I think a great thing too is surrounding yourself with people way smarter than you. Like I had mentioned some of my friends at Parker, where, I surround myself with a lot of people that are way smarter than I am in domains that I never thought about. And just kind of being around them has been, wonderful, because it's just like, it's almost like this serendipity, you pass out coffee and you just start, shooting it with your friends and asking, like, what do you think? What have you read? What's going on with you? And then you argue about certain things, and I will say I've been very blessed to have a great group of people around me. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been so successful at Parker, has been the ability to have a lot of people question, like, why do I like DNS, or what's so great about it? Or how is it different from this this other 3-letter acronym, and the ability to do that has been, I've been very blessed for that situation. So I think that's another key thing too, is you have to have people that are going to keep you honest.
Well, I think you have somebody even closer in your life who's pretty bright, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. My wife. Oh, what a wizard. Oh my gosh. She's brilliant, unbelievably brilliant. And I think, like, for me, she's like, every time, like, we'll talk on the phone and I'll be like, oh, that's such a smart idea. I never thought about it. It's almost that, like, it's not cross-contamination, but it's like because of how she thinks in her field, she makes me think so differently about how I can treat patients as a chiropractor. And man, that's been really, really wonderful to have in my life. So I'm not sure if she'll ever watch this, but I love you, Cake.
And I've only spoke with her over the phone, but her name is Andrea. And what's her background, briefly?
She's a DDS from Guatemala. She finished top of her class in Guatemala and then came here for a 2-year residency. And she didn't originally want to stay in the United States. She wanted to do a year here and then go to Europe. And then we met. And so I convinced her to stay. And, we've been thick as thieves ever since. She finished, she worked in the cancer center. She was the chief resident at UConn, and she really was incredible. She worked with, I think, over 250 or 300 patients for UConn, which is a lot of patients. She was one of the highest earners, and she's now down here in Roanoke, Virginia, which is where I am, and I'm visiting her, and she's doing the same thing here. She's breaking all of their ceilings and stuff like that. So the previous owner that was running the clinic, that was supposedly the most successful there, they were making about 75 to 80,000 per month for productions, and she hit 157,000. So, and now she's on track for more. So she just keeps, I think that's the thing I love about her too. She drives that competitive nature in me to be a better doctor, because I see her and it's just like, wow, just amazing.
Fantastic. So that's another way to certainly keep yourself in good company and bright company. and with equal motivations and co-inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So then, another thing that I really appreciate about you in our discussions is you've also put quite a lot of time into really understanding more about neurophysiology and clinical neurology.
Mm-hmm.
Very often, DNS students in the past, I'd say in the past decade, there's been, I think, an increasing emphasis on biomechanics. So posture and intra-abdominal pressurization and stabilization. And it's critical because this is foundational. But the Prong School was founded by neurologists like Professors Levitt and Yonda and Vojta and others. It's important that we always keep that balance, as I like to say, for DNS. The neurophysiology and the biomechanics are like the yin and the yang. But you've gone and taken additional clinical neurological training to help to understand and integrate that. Is that right?
It is. It is. I started before in my undergrad with one of the labs, the neuro labs at UConn, where they looked at pharmacology and how it affects human physiology, and I was absolutely enamored. Also, when I was taking my exercise physiology classes, I always wondered. I was like, "What's that big thing, on top of the shoulders?" And they're like, "What? The brain?" And they're like, don't worry about that." and I was like, I feel so important. So when I came to Parker, I basically came, one of the big reasons I came was because of their neuroscience masters that they teach here. And I was super blessed to meet Dr. Dishman. And I have just been enamored ever since with, some of the ideas that are kind of taught and how much you can start to look at patients through that lens of the neuro side and make things make sense.
They talk about Robert Dishman, right?
Donald. I think it's Donald Dishman.
Oh, Donald Dishman. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Very good. So then, how is that tying into your plans? Because now, when we talk a little bit about your future, you're starting to figure out how do I apply it and how am I going to integrate all of this information into a practical application to chiropractic clinical practice.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you integrating? How are you thinking along those lines? Who are you speaking with? And what's your plan at this point to proceed as you go into your next phase of chiropractic clinical training?
That's a great question as well. I'm the vice president of the Neuro Club, and we do a lot with vestibular. We do a lot with proprioception and some of the other ones, ocular training. And so right now, I'm looking at a lot of the stuff that the Prague School basically talks about as well, which is integration. So dealing with patients who have maybe some soft lesion of like the cerebellum. Maybe have some dizziness going on and trying to work through those patients. Maybe just adjusting isn't enough. And maybe, they need some training of the vestibular system to try and get everything back in sync basically. And that seems to be kind of where I'm at right now is where I'm working through both Dishman's Diplomate and the master's program, as well as some of the Carrick modules, which is another school for the neurology and neuroscience field for chiropractic, and trying to figure out how we all intersect. But I think for me, my favorite part is like the more I learn about each of those, the more I see DNS is basically at the heart of it. One of the big things is with Carrick is, basically they look at the cerebellum as the way into these other systems, into ocular training and into the vestibular system, because that's the big integrator. And I think what's so funny is some of the research that DNS has put out has shown that what are we really interacting with is those stretch receptors in the, trunk. And what does that do for representation in the brain, in the cerebellum, and coordinating it with these other senses as well? I forget what his name is right now. I think it's also Collage. The other Collage for Prague is doing vision things as well with the positions. And that seems to be kind of where I'm trying to bridge everything together with chiropractic of, trying to add more proprioception input into the system. Same thing with Graston, or I remember you had talked to the person from Factor. And one of the things I loved about him is he's like, hey man, it's all neural input. That's what we're looking at here, and trying to change the system. And so, that seems to be kind of where I'm driving down, is the idea of this either different, afferentation, or, better afferentation, which is where I think the DNS part really fits in well.
Professor Yanda used to say, you must remember that there's only one nervous system, one integrated nervous system, and too often people are forgetting that. And so we have all of these routes of incoming information, of afferentation, but really it's no different than, recently I drove from here in Oklahoma just a few weeks ago and saw you and some colleagues. I visited Parker and in Dallas there. And the fact is there were multiple options of how to get there. By driving, by plane, different driving routes. They ended up getting me to the same destination. It was just depend on what was most convenient, what was most effective or efficient, different factors. And so this is the same thing with Dr. Greg Dorr was saying from Factor. And certainly it's the same thing that Jan was saying. And what Professor Kolaj really helped us to and helped me to understand that then in the end, by doing these tests, by doing these treatments, we are in fact talking to the body directly, because we're giving it some sort of stimulus. And as long as we have the knowledge, we have the understanding of the nervous system, of the various afferent routes, so to speak, functionally routes, and then the initial destinations, and understanding about the integrated nature within the brain of when you do have that incoming afferentation, and then you start to see how it reacts, how it integrates, and then you see the efferentation, you see the results, then essentially you're having a discussion, you're having a talk, and that all you have to do is make sure that you are sufficiently literate in your ability, in your skill set to understand what the response is. What is it telling you? Because the key isn't just to do something. And too often, I think, when we get in clinical practice or we get into being rushed, we are so busy trying to get things accomplished that we forget to take the time to see and to reassess to see, well, did I actually accomplish what my goal was? Because we make shortcuts. And some shortcuts are okay, but then others are not, and you have to take the time. And that is sometimes we become too impatient. We become impatient clinicians, and that's something to guard against.
Definitely. And it's funny because you have so many different systems of thought. And this is actually, I had a question for you on this one. So like for us, we have, for proprioception, it's Tom Michaud, and we have for, the, cerebellum is for me, it's DNS and FRC and some of these other 3-letter acronyms. But as a clinician who's, gotten all of this experience, how are you basically saying that this is worth your time versus just some elegant kind of explanation,
Well, I think it really starts with that initial consultation, because you have to come in open. At least I really thought of myself like with each patient, like a blank slate with each patient. And because I needed to see what I felt. What happens when you get out of school is you're so focused on trying to follow all of these models that have been drilled into you and all of this information. But you need a little time to be able to integrate it and apply it and allow yourself to get back to your humanity and to be able to take the time to listen to what they're saying and to what they're telling you, and be able to integrate your human instincts and now your clinical instincts. So when you're going through school, you become a broader person, and it's almost a different person because you have to march in lockstep while you're in school in order to follow the professors, to get the skill set, to get the depths of the understanding of the key areas. But then once you get into practice, you find, okay, so, it turns out that, I needed to understand all 122 of those the shoulder orthopedic tests and PA tests. But it turns out I don't have to do 122 of those tests for each patient that comes in. Who knew? And so then you end up starting to find out, okay, now I have to be efficient without missing key things. So as a result, with a little time, as you start to allow yourself to become yourself, but it's a new self, but you have the same basic skills you had in communication and in listening and into reading people that you already had and you possessed before your first day of clinical school, whether it's physical therapy or chiropractic, it's irrelevant. But the fact is now you are a different person. You're a more educated person, and there's a clinical part of you that didn't exist before. And now you need some time to blend the two together and find your own instincts. Because I found, that by doing that, I could read my patient more effectively. And that you've talked about the biopsychosocial model and the fact, and this is so critical in our society. It's so critical. And it's one of the things that concerns me about today's students is because of our digital age, because of phones and because of AI, that as a result, we're losing some of our interpersonal communication skills and our instincts of how to interact and integrate and become more intimate with people, other humans. And when I say intimate, just the fact that it can be friendship, it can be acquaintances. There's different levels of intimacy, but the fact is, what it is connection. And what we have is one of the great strengths we have, those of us in the manual therapeutic arts, is we have this great benefit, our ace in the hole as a profession for hands-on, for integrating touch. So, but you have to be able to communicate and read the person. And those are the things that will tell you really where you want to focus. You want to also understand people and their interests and their ability to listen, their curiosities. Some people, really, a person might come in and you say, I've had this problem for 10 years, and every time I bend over, I hurt my back, and I'm very busy, and I just need the quickest treatment I can get to get me back. That's all I want. And another person, have the same presentation, but say, I'm sick of this. Mm-hmm. And so now, I've had good results, for example, with chiropractic treatment, and I feel better, but what can I do? And before, very often people in their first, second go-rounds with back pain or any pain where it's still kind of acute, they're not prepared to put the time or the finances into taking responsibility to get better. But after a while, they have either a more significant injury or they've had enough of it, and now all of a sudden they're inspired. So for the new ones, I would take the time to let them know, okay, let's get you better now. But if you're interested down the road, we could do more and give you. There's research that shows us things that we can do that can reduce the risk of this coming back, because historically, the problem with back pain, for example, is not acute back pain. It's recurrent back pain. It's chronic back pain. This is what's debilitating, and this is what changes and compromises people's lives, the quality of their lives, and it also overloads nations because of the overall impact, the cost of production, the costs of treatment, the costs of disabilities. So this is a very long answer because it was the simplest question, but in summary, the ability to read your patient and then start to integrate all of this information, it takes time. You'll get that now in your clinical training, hopefully with the right supervision, to start to understand that. But in the end, what you find is your clinical instincts. I found a number of patients with cancers and other health disorders, not just cancers, that they weren't clear cut, as the books would say in their presentation. And this is one of the big complications when we get out of school is we find that the patients haven't read the books. And so as a result, they can be rather inconvenient at times and it can be blurred. But, I found that by relying on my instincts and say, this doesn't feel right. We need to get a second opinion here. Something doesn't feel right. I'm very fortunate in more than 40 years, clinical practice, never had a malpractice case against me. And I think that there were a number of times where if I would have missed those things, that I was really at risk. But then, one of the unique things about my textbook is we had a chapter dedicated to risk management, clinical risk management. And a lot of that really had to do with simple patient communication. And in the end, certainly from a legal standpoint, people generally don't sue people who they like.
Yeah.
But the chapter in my book was added there because, in my opinion, good clinical risk management is good clinical management. They're not separate. It's all together. As you connect with your patient, as you connect to the person, to the human, and then as a result, then you help them for the specific problem. But your goal is to connect and to be the person who helps them to understand the problem by connecting with them as a human.
Couldn't agree more, Doc. I could not agree more. I mean, I think one thing that you had mentioned, which is, at least for our generation or my generation going through there, is the communications and the ability to communicate with the patient. There's a really good book called Reclaiming Communication or Reclaiming Conversations. And it was a lot of that is how do we reconnect with them? And that was actually, I'm not sure if we have enough time, but there's one more question I actually had for you, given, the progression. I mean, you've been through so much of chiropractic history. Where do you think we're going?
Well, I think we are winding down, but I think as a profession, I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. I think that there's two professions in the United States, for example, and that are both now doctorate level, that are primary access and are non-drug, non-surgical, both physical therapy and chiropractic. So I think, one, there needs to be increasing levels of collaboration, and all of our energies should be focused and more teamwork. And we see that, and you saw that, for example, at Dr. Kaliko's office. First. So I think we need to see more integration, because there still tends to be too much of a competitiveness. And it was really the great Robin McKenzie, the most famous physical therapist, I think, in history, who was the one who, as I've mentioned to you, who said, you just have to remember it's for the patient that we all serve. So I think that what I see is greater levels of integration, better levels of collaboration, and exactly how that then brings us more together. Well, that's what's important for me, is that we continue to team together, because the literature and the patients that we serve is all bringing us together to team together. And that's how we look at it also in DNS in the Prague School. We have PTs and DCs that are both international instructors, and we don't see any difference. We just see that we're teammates, and that's what we need to be. So that's where I think and I hope we're headed. That's what my textbook was designed to be, and my teaching is designed to be, is more collaboration. So I think that's what I would say where we're headed. We are now running out of time, and the problem we always have is that I've been fortunate to have such wonderful, brilliant guests, and yet that we have so little time, it seems, to talk about things that we're passionate about. But in closing, I would really like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank you for being such a wonderful, inspiring student, because older retired professors like me, you're the ones who give us energy and motivation And generally, what we're really looking for is the question we haven't yet thought of, and you're pretty good at bringing those questions up. And so, I wish you, I wish you all the best. But I know that you're already in the process of earning it because you're showing the foundational aspects of what leads to excellence and what ACEs Optimus is all about and what being your very best is all about. So thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. And again, I really do appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to you on the podcast.
And that's it for us. We'll see you next time on ACEs Optimus. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the ACEs Optimus Show. Catch you on the next one.